The silent observation of the responses of the mind, without judgment, condemnation, or comparison, brings about revolution. To see what you actually are without any comparison gives you tremendous energy to look. Awareness is silent and choiceless, in which comparison and judgment have ceased. We are always comparing what we are with what we should be. The should be is a projection of what we think we ought to be. Contradiction exists when there is comparison. Identification and comparison maintain the conflict of duality, and there is no solution within its pattern. You are a complex, living organism. Understand yourself not through comparison, but through perception of what is. For the present is the doorway to the past and to the future. From childhood, we are trained to compare between what we are today with what was yesterday. This comparison, this measurement, is the beginning of compromise, which is wastage of energy. Find out for yourself whether you can live without comparison, measure, never using the words better or more. See what happens. A mind which is deeply observant does not get caught up in self-centered activities, and the mind is not observant if there is any action of condemnation or comparison. When we think, feel what is, without comparison, without judgment, with complete integration of the thinker and thought, then that which is utterly transformed. If every thought feeling is thought out, felt out, as fully and deeply as possible, without condemnation or comparison, acceptance or identification, then all the hidden layers of consciousness will reveal themselves. We have been trained from childhood to compare. We go to school and are given marks. We are subject to comparison throughout our school life, and then at university if we are lucky enough or unlucky enough. Where there is contradiction, opposites, there must be conflict. That conflict indicates violence. Comparison, imitation, and conformity are essentially violence. To understand you, I must have no preconceived formulations about you, no prejudice. I must be open, without judgment, without comparison. Once you have perceived the futility of comparison, there is a great freedom. Meditation is not an achievement. There is no method, system, or practice. Meditation begins with the ending of comparison. We function from a center, and what is that center? It is a center of fear, greed, pleasure, despair, hope, dependency, ambition, comparison. To know yourself, to observe, you must have a mind in which there is no sense of comparison or judgment or condemnation or justification. Look without comparison. To live without comparison, to live without any kind of measurement inwardly, never to compare what you are with what you should be. Secretly or openly, there is a constant soliloquy, talking to oneself in terms of comparison. Comparison between what is, what has been, and what will be is the process of fear. No saints, no heroes, no God, no comparison. That means you stand completely alone. Do you know what that means? Comparison and conformity are bound to lead to disorder. The moment we enter into the question of comparison, then what is the standard from which we are comparing? Explanation, time, repetition, conformity, fear, comparison. All that is the basis of disorder. If there is no comparison, the energy is extraordinarily alone. You know what I mean? Alone in the sense completely gathered. What is the consequence of comparison? You are always comparing. Don't live with comparison, comparing yourself with somebody. When you compare yourself with somebody, you are destroying yourself. I compare and therefore further fear, strengthen fear. And I say, why do I compare at all? Can I live a life without comparison? In comparison, there is conflict, there is envy, there is brutality. That's not living, that's not vital, that is real decadence. Freedom means a life without comparison. If you once understand the nature of comparison, naturally every form of authority which you create in yourself comes to an end. You give marks to the student, and so forcing him to compete with himself. And the final misery of all this comparison is the examination. Now, can you live a life without comparison and therefore incapable of being hurt? Because you have understood the danger of comparison, it's finished. When there is division and fragmentation in oneself, there must be conflict. The different kinds of organized beliefs have led us to division between ourselves. There is only unity through intelligence and love. Worldwide, all of us should have food, clothes, and shelter, but that is denied by various forms of division. We have hardly any physical security. Thought is the result of the past, and where the past is functioning, it must create division, and therefore conflicts. If in looking there is this division as the I and the not I, the observer and the observed, the thinker and the thought, the experiencer and the experience, there must be conflict. When thought separates itself as the thinker, as the experiencer, causing division and conflict, then that experiencer, observer, thinker becomes the past, which is stationary and therefore cannot move. The analyzer in his examination nourishes and sustains division, and therefore increases conflict. Thought has brought about the division between people, the wars, and the structure of religious belief. We have made this world and are responsible for it. There is no division between the world and me. Observe without division. The wise, the compassionate, do not think of man in terms of division. The foolish are caught up in the social and religious divisions of man. We are not intelligent enough to see the dangers of nationalism, the dangers of division between people. Conflict exists only when there is division between me and not me. The deep unconscious is the past, and we are operating from that. There is the division into the past, present, and future, which is time. The identification of oneself with the nation has brought dreadful wars, misery, and confusion, ever-increasing division. Where there is no division, there is goodness. You do not have to cultivate goodness. The source of violence is the me, the ego, the self, which expresses itself in so many ways, in division, in trying to become somebody. When the mind sees the danger of division very clearly, actually sees it, then there is a totally different kind of action. Conflict must exist everlastingly as long as there is a division between the observer and the observed. There's the observer and the thing observed. In that division, there's inevitably contradiction. That contradiction is the root of all strife. It is a law. Where there is division, there must be conflict. Can the mind observe without division where the observer is the observed? Where there is division, there must be conflict, either within or without. Wherever there is a division, a fragmentation, love cannot be, because goodness is the state of non-division. Analysis implies division. There is the analyzer and that which is to be analyzed. Therefore, there is already the beginning of conflict. When there is no division between the thinker and the thought, conflict comes to an end. Where there is division between the controller and the thing controlled, there is no goodness. There is no division between thought and time. Thought is time. There is no division between the outer and the inner. They are one. The observer is the fact. The observer is that state. There is no division between the observer and the thing he is observing. Why is there this division, this cleavage between what is and what has been or what should be? The key to this observation lies in seeing things without division. As long as there is division between memories and the observer, this division creates conflict. As long as there is a division between you as the observer and the thing observed, then in that division, there is conflict. See actually what is, and see that what is the observer. There is no division between the observer and the observed. When thoughts go on, it is still the outside. There is no division as the outside and the inside. In attention, there is no effort. In concentration, there is division. As long as there is a division between the observer and the observed, there must be conflict. We say we are Jews, Hindus, Muslims, Christians. This division, with its supposed security, divides people and so brings about insecurity. Thought has created the division between religions, and this division brings about war. Having created the problem, thought wants to solve it. I am angry today, but one day I will be without anger. That is the division. So there is conflict. As long as there is division in me, I will divide the world. Where there is limitation, there must be division. Where there is division, there must be disorder, and we live in disorder. Thought is the very essence of division. Essentially, there is no division between the outer and the inner, in essence, deep down. Intelligence is a state of mind in which division as prejudice is burnt out of me. Attached to my ideas, my gods, my nationality, I'm a conservative and you are a liberal. this terrible division, battle that we call living. Is there an observation without division? Division, which thought has created. Find out. If analysis is a continuance of the division between the analyzer and the analyzed, and so continuance of conflict, what will you do? Has thought invented the idea of the me separate from you, and in this division hopes to find security? Where there is identification, there is division. And where there is division, there is conflict. Where there is division, whether religious, national, economic, or social, there must be conflict. Division essentially is the basis of conflict between Catholic, Protestant, Hindu, Muslim, Communist, Socialist, Democrat, Republican. When one is seeking one's own fulfillment, ambition, security, and success, that must inevitably create division. Analysis, which is division, must inevitably produce conflict. It may modify, it may help a few neurotics, but it's the platform of conflict. What happens when I realize that the division between the observer and the observed is illusory? Where there is division, there must always be conflict. As there is division between us, there is no relationship, neither superficial nor deep. The division between the observer and the thing observed is apparent, not real. Can the observer cease? Because he is the cause of conflict. He is the cause of division. Why this division between the wound and myself? That's our pattern of thinking, this division. It may not be a fact. The division of people, races, groups, the religious groups, and the scientific groups, and the artistic group. Everything is broken up. So is it possible to observe oneself so totally without any division? The speaker says yes, it's absolutely possible. Can I observe myself so that in that observation there is no division as the observer observing? What causes the division? Opinion. Conclusions. In division there is no good. Goodness is non-divisible. Freedom means a quality of mind which has no division in itself. Even in science, there is this division. Everything we touch seems to divide and breed antagonism, every form of strife. If you go very, very, very deeply into oneself, rather cautiously and inquiring, you will find there is always this division, this searching. We need security, but we destroy that security through division, through fragmentation of different races, nationalities, classes. All over the world, this is happening. The division of classes, races, people, the division in relationship. The ideal arises only when the truth of division is not seen. You see every kind of brutality and violence, wars, killing, hero worship, division of races, governments, armies, right in front of you. Division is a kind of game we are playing with ourselves, and this game leads to great horrors, brutality, and violence. Goodness is the state of attention in which there is no division. Wherever there is division, there is contradiction. Contradiction implies conflict. A mind that is making an effort can never be quiet. Through effort, the mind can never become completely still. Conscious effort to examine the deeper content of the mind is extremely difficult unless the surface mind is completely free from conditioning. When you are afraid, you develop the opposite, courage, which is resistance, contradiction, effort, and strain. There is the conflict between what you are and what should be according to a system. This means there is effort. If you listen without effort, you'll know what it means to live completely holy. That way, there is a miracle, the greatest miracle of all. Silence of the mind comes naturally, easily, without any effort if you know how to observe, how to look. Have you ever wondered if you could live a life completely without any effort or strife? The very word effort means conflict. That which has no conflict cannot be approached through conflict. Effort, however pleasant or unpleasant, gratifying or profitable, does distort and pervert the mind. When one who is greedy makes an effort to become non-greedy, This effort we consider righteous and spiritual. But is it right effort? There is distortion the moment there is an effort. Every effort of the mind to free itself is the continuance of thought, within its own circle, the circle of thought, of time. Is it possible to live without effort and yet be intensely active? There is no quietness if there is a maker of effort. Effort means being in conflict, in which is involved achievement, suppression, and denial. In yoga, there should be no effort at all. Don't force it. Is it possible to break a habit without effort, without cultivating its opposite, without suppressing it through vigilance and resistance? Wrong effort produces wrong results. To understand profoundly and widely, there must be the cessation of all effort, which is a difficult art. Does understanding come through effort, or does understanding come when there is no effort? Have you tested it or tried it? If I want to understand what you are saying, must I make an effort to listen? Understanding comes not through effort, but spontaneously when there is an effortless relaxation. Communication is not possible when you are interpreting what you are reading according to your own knowledge, pleasure, or opinions, or when you are making a tremendous effort to comprehend. As long as I desire to be successful either in this world or spiritually, I must make effort, I must exert myself to achieve, and suffering is inherent in the very nature of that effort. We have been brought up, educated to make an effort, and if we do not make an effort, we think something is wrong. We fear that we shall stagnate, degenerate. The mind that wants to change or improve itself will always remain mediocre, however great its effort. Questioner: is there not a way straight to the problem to find out the truth? Krishnamurti: there is, but this demands utter stillness, open receptivity. This requires right understanding. Otherwise, effort to be open, to be tranquil, becomes another means of self-expansion. The right kind of meditation will solve many of our difficulties. In it is the key to most of our problems. Right meditation is for thought to free itself from all compulsion, from coercion, from wrong effort. Effort and then dissipation weaken the structure of sustained understanding. In this wasteful process, the necessary pliability of the mind is lost. Is not our attempt in meditation to be, to become, or not to be, not to become? Our effort is directed to achieve. When you love completely, every thought comes with such joy, clarity, and happiness. This can only happen when there is integration and when there is no effort. Any form of struggle or strife is an indication of distraction. And distraction, which is effort, must exist as long as psychologically I wish to transform what is into something it is not. Why do we cling to the dogmas, beliefs, and rituals that religions introduce? When we understand that, they will drop away like leaves in the autumn, without any effort. The moment you are aware, which is neither to condemn nor justify, the moment you accept, look, and observe what is, there is no effort. Then the thing that you observe, that which is, that which you are aware of, has an extraordinary significance. Prayer and effort bring their own reward, but is the reward commensurate with the real? Have you succeeded in changing yourself through effort? Radically, not superficially. Or is there a different approach to this altogether? What happens when the watcher and the watched are the same? Effort to change it comes to an end, doesn't it? Conflict comes to an end. As long as my activity is self-centered and self-expressive, there must be this void. I see that to fill this void, I make every kind of effort. In attention, there is no effort. In concentration, there is division. A mind that is making an effort can never be quiet. Through effort, the mind can never become completely still. Can the mind empty itself without effort? In meditation, which is to bring about a mind that is absolutely quiet, any form of effort is futile. The very seeing is the breaking of conditioning, not I make an effort to break. That is insight and action. Be a totally different person from the rest of the world. Live a life without effort, clear, vital. In attention, there is no effort, there is no strain, there's no tension, there is no action of will. When there is constant strain and effort and pressure, is there love? Cut at the root of will and effort. The real yogi doesn't make effort at all of any kind. Without any effort, because effort implies desire. Without any goal, which implies also a desire. Without any ideal, an action which is instant, without any effort or conflict. If there is an effort, it's not yoga. The decision to empty the mind is to invite frustration and the endless means and efforts. The very seeing is the breaking of conditioning, not I make an effort to break. That is insight and action. Any activity or education that conditions the mind through nationalism, through identification with a group, an ideology, a dogma, is an impediment to truth. We are both the thinker and the thought, but we like to identify ourselves with one and disown the other. This identification and this denial prevent the understanding of the conflict. Identification and comparison maintain the conflict of duality, and there is no solution within its pattern. Intelligence is not the cultivation of memory or reason, but an awareness in which identification and choice have ceased. Be aware of what is, without condemnation, without justification or identification, then you will see that there is a deeper understanding that resolves our problems. If you begin to be aware choicelessly, without condemnation, without justification, without identification, which is extremely difficult, then self-knowledge becomes extremely creative. We have been educated in a way of life which furthers the self through achievement, through identification, through organized religion. This way of thought and action has led us to fearful catastrophes and untold misery. Be self-aware, which will reveal the hidden motives of imitation, envy, fear, the craving for security, for power, and so on. This awareness, when free of self-identification, brings understanding and tranquility, which lead to the realization of supreme wisdom. If we deeply experienced and understood that the self is ever impermanent, there would be no identification with any form of craving, with any nation, or with any system of thought or religion, for with identification comes the horror of war, the ruthlessness of civilization. If you are aware, you will realize that your mind is constantly engaged in the activities of the ego and its identification. If you pursue this activity further, you will find the deep-seated self-interest. If every thought feeling is thought out, felt out, as fully and deeply as possible, without condemnation or comparison, acceptance or identification, then all the hidden layers of consciousness will reveal themselves. Awareness is understanding without identification. When thought accepts or rejects, compares or judges, then the analytical process begins, the thinker watching his thought. To understand myself, I must, without identification and choice, be aware of the total process that is the me. Spontaneity comes into being when there is awareness, awareness in which there is no condemnation, judgment, or identification. If you go deeper and deeper and let it flow freely, it becomes meditation, in which the thinker is the thought. The identification of oneself with the nation has brought dreadful wars, misery, and confusion, ever-increasing division. The self is built up and strengthened through the pleasure and pain principle, through memory and identification. This process is the cause of conflict and sorrow. Condemnation, justification, or identification prevents understanding, and to be aware of the whole total process of what is, there must be choiceless observation. In freedom alone can there be understanding. But freedom is denied when the observer, through identification, condemns or justifies. Identification brings about the illusion of permanency, and it is the loss of this which causes fear. Right thinking is not possible without thought, freeing itself from prejudice and identification. When you observe without identification, without the past entering into it, then you have that tremendous energy to wipe it away. Don't you find that any identification with something is a form of isolation? Where there is identification, there is division. And where there is division, there is conflict. Why does thought identify with sensations? Is there duality in identification? Without love and compassion, there is no intelligence. Love has no opposite. Love transforms even the most ugly. Without love and compassion, meditation is utterly meaningless. Without love and compassion, with its intelligence, meditation has very little meaning. You do not love your neighbor. If you really love your neighbor, there will be kindness, mercy to animals, to the fatherless. There will not be harsh words about anybody. Envy can be rooted out. Then life becomes an entirely different thing. Then perhaps we shall know what love is, what peace is. Love has no opposite as hate. Where there is love, there is compassion with which comes intelligence. When you end something, love is. When you end attachment completely, love is. Desire distorts clarity and prevents the extraordinary quality of love. Has desire any place where there is love? Love and goodwill are not mere sentiments. Their ways are simple and extraordinarily far-reaching, which the cunning intellect cannot possibly understand. Do you see the beauty and the depth, the greatness and the sacredness, the actuality of love? Why don't we love? What is preventing us from loving? If you can find out the cause, you may know how to love. The beauty of love is death, and one knows neither. I don't think we will put an end to cruelty to animals, because I don't think we know what it means to love. Where there is ambition, whether in the physical world or in the psychological world, ambition to be on top of everything, to be a great success, to have power religiously or physically, can love exist? Can love exist with sorrow? Or is love something entirely different? If love is the opposite of hate, it is not love. If peace is the opposite of violence, it is no longer peace. Is a free observation without any motive, then the hidden contents of consciousness are exposed naturally. Just to observe, and the observation reveals everything. There is nothing to observe, just observation, not into something. There is no getting rid of anything. There is only, if I may point out most respectfully, the observation of it, the perception of it. Shouldn't one also learn the actuality of observation? Not with knowledge, but just to observe. Where there is a center, the radius of its observation is very limited. Where there is no center, then observation is vast, clear. The observation of what is going on non-comparatively, non-linguistically, the purity of observation of oneself, an observation which unfolds the story of suffering. The act of observation of oneself is the highest form of creation. As long as there is any kind of motive in my observation, I cannot go further. Observation of the fact without any reaction. Can I observe myself so that in that observation there is no division as the observer observing? Is there a way of observing myself so completely that that very observation is complete action? The negation of what is considered moral, not as a reaction, but observation of actually what is the beauty of virtue, which is order. Action is not separate from perception. When you see something to be true, that very perception is action. As a baby, there is perception, sensation, contact, and then desire, from which comes my mother, my toy, which grows to my bank account, my house. Are you going to turn inwardly, which is not an entertainment, but something that demands great capacity of observation, examination, and non-personal perception? Concern over detail, over our many conflicting thoughts and feelings, will not bring about an understanding of the whole. What is required is the sudden perception of the totality of the mind. There must be the capacity to see the truth in a flash, and that very perception will cleanse the mind of the past in an instant. The very perception of seeing what is false is the truth. Perception is in the present. You can't perceive tomorrow. You perceive now, and when thought interferes in that perception, thought being the response of the past, it must distort the present. Perception does not require time. The moment you look at the falseness of things and see clearly the false as the false, that perception is the beginning of intelligence. I do not think anything is going to be achieved through analysis, either by ourselves or by a professional. We might be able to modify ourselves slightly, live a little more quietly with a little more affection, but in itself, it will not give total perception. Is there a perception which is not of time and thought, a perception that is entirely out of the pattern to which the brain has been accustomed? You are a complex living organism. Understand yourself not through comparison, but through perception of what is, for the present is the doorway to the past and to the future. There is a totally different kind of energy when there is pure perception, which is not related to thought and time. Thought can imagine anything, gods or no gods, angels or no angels. It can produce every form of neurotic perception, idea, and conclusion. There must be a different kind of meditation, a different kind of perception that is seeing and not evaluating. Is enlightenment, understanding, or perception a matter of time? There must be a totally different movement, a non-accumulative perception action. Is there a perception which is not of time or thought, which can see the whole nature of conflict, and with that very perception bring about the ending of conflict? To understand, mind-heart must unburden itself of its accumulation so that it is capable of right perception. Living in the present is the instant perception of beauty and the great delight in it without seeking pleasure from it. It is only when the total mind is silent, quiet, that there is perception, seeing clearly, with a mind that is not confused. We are the past, we are time, sorrow and despair, with an occasional perception of beauty, a flowering of goodness or deep tenderness. Belief has nothing whatever to do with perception. On the contrary, belief prevents perception. The perception, the total observation of jealousy and the freedom from it, is not a matter of time. Insight is the total absence of the whole movement of thought as time and remembrance. Direct perception. It is fear that prevents perception. When we see very clearly how the observer separates and distorts, in that flash of perception the observer is not. Perception of the totality can only come about instantly, not through time, thought, exploration. Perception means there is no perceiver. The clarity of perception acts without will. Freedom is the clear perception of order, which is essentially moral. At the moment of perception, memory is not. Yoga means unitive perception, to see the whole of life as one. Through the perception of what is, the actual, that very perception brings about a fundamental change. The perception of the truth is intelligence. In that intelligence there is complete security, because that intelligence is not yours or mine. Any form of compulsion, persuasion, or propaganda distorts one's perception. When thought operates and controls the movement of perception, then desire comes. Can you observe without the interference of thought? Perception is never continuous. It is not of time. Because we see the truth that one's existence has been lived irresponsibly, that very perception then is responsibility. The emptying of consciousness of all its content is to have total movement in perception, action. I'm not saying you shouldn't stand on your head. I do it. But that is not going to lead to unitive perception. Insight means immediate perception of what is true in that problem. The perception of that dissolves the problem. Insight is a direct perception. The perception of truth has nothing to do with you or with me. It is truth. Intelligence is the perception of the whole, the total seeing, and which cannot be if the mind functions in fragments. Love is the perception of what is, not the sorrow of what is. Perception is the root of action. There is no getting rid of anything. There is only, if I may point out most respectfully, the observation of it, the perception of it. Is total perception compassion? The perception of understanding. Perception implies a choiceless action. Intelligence is perception and action, no ideation. Can there be a total perception which heals completely? Total perception can only exist when the center is not. A total perception, a total comprehension, a total feeling, a total awareness. Where there is total perception, a change in thought takes place. We look at ourselves or at another with past memories interfering with our perception. When the mind is empty, when the mind is nothing, not a thing, in that there is perception. When there is the perception of real danger, thought doesn't act. It is a shock to thought, to see something very clearly and act instantly according to that perception. I would call that intelligence. Perception, to see things as they are actually, what is actual, without the interpretation of the perceiver with his background. Freedom is not the act of decision, but the act of perception. The simplicity of perception is denied when we are living according to a formula or an ideal. Freedom is the clear perception of order, which is essentially moral. How do I have direct perception of why I think these thoughts, why these thoughts arise? Direct perception is only possible with no other interference of thought. Condemnation, justification, and resistance is thought. We are afraid to look at our fears. In seeing the false as false, truth is perceived. Self-knowledge, or seeing what is false in the eye, is the beginning of intelligence. All stimulation, whether of the church or of alcohol or of drugs or of the written or spoken word, will inevitably bring about dependence, and that dependence prevents us from seeing clearly for ourselves and therefore from having vital energy. I hope we are meeting each other as would two friends on a trail, stopping to sit down quietly, listening to the birds, the nearby stream, seeing the beautiful, still mountains, seeing the utter uselessness of your life and being deeply shocked by it. Perhaps you are looking to another or to circumstances to pull you out of your fog of laziness. Meditation is an awareness constantly becoming deeper and deeper as a result of clearly seeing through the many layers of consciousness. It is like a pool that is still when the process is over. You can only understand now, not tomorrow. Understanding is independent of time. Time and thought are the roots of fear. Most of our days are spent in self-occupation. We are concerned with ourselves all the time. To know your own emptiness, you must look at it, but you cannot look at it if your mind is all the time seeking a distraction from the fact that it is empty. We build a wall around ourselves and say, I am related. We look over the enclosing wall occasionally when it is suitable and convenient, but most of the time we lurk behind the wall. We are asking ourselves why human beings are what they are now after the span of time called evolution. Human beings are still violent, brutal, primitive, have international wars and economic wars. Perception does not require time. The silence was absolute. It wasn't the silence of museums and churches, but something totally unrelated to time and space. Look as though you were looking for the first time, as you might at a rose for the first time. Is time the root of fear? It would be a waste of time and energy if we regarded these talks merely as intellectual stimulation or an entertainment of new ideas. It would be like plowing a field everlastingly without ever sowing. If you have a center from which you are attending, that is merely a form of concentration. But if you are attending and there is no center, it means that you're giving complete attention. In that attention, there is no time. There is a totally different kind of energy when there is pure perception, which is not related to thought and time. If you remain in the field of knowledge all the time, there is nothing new. The content of our consciousness is the movement of thought in time and space. Is enlightenment, understanding, or perception a matter of time? The stream of continuity we call memory is a time process, the time process being the past, present, and future. The mind shuttles back and forward in this continuity, and it is not aware that it is still a part of the continuity. To understand, observe, perceive the nature, structure, and causation of violence needs no time because it is a fact. We are violent, and it is said that to become nonviolent needs time. We are questioning that, doubting that. Anyone with enough intelligence, diligence, and patience can be free. Freedom comes to all of us if we give our time to it, if we dedicate ourselves to seeking out and understanding our own conditioning. Self-understanding is an enormous task. It is not to be done casually, later on, tomorrow, but rather every day, every moment, all the time. Thinking is the product of the past. Thinking is of time, the response to time. Therefore, thinking can never be the timeless. We are so occupied with our own thoughts, problems, fears, and envy that we have no time to be in communion. Time can only produce time, not the timeless. Meditation is the purgation from the mind of all its accumulations, the purgation of the power to gather, to identify, to become, the purgation of self-growth, of self-fulfillment. Meditation is the freeing of the mind from memory, from time. All that is spiritual is, in essence, timeless. It is eternal. If that is so, the timeless, the eternal is beyond birth and death. It is beyond time and space. How can the mind free itself from time, from the past, the present, and the future? It can free itself only from time, from the present, by being aware of everything, of all that we are doing now, of all thinking, of all feeling, by being aware now and not tomorrow. At the present time, the world is in such chaos and mess, in such an extraordinary, catastrophic strain that it requires a new outlook, a revolutionary way of thinking about the problems that surround us every day. Do you know what time is? Not by the watch, not chronological time, but psychological time. It is the interval between idea and action. You may preach nonviolence for the rest of your life and all the time be sowing the seeds of violence. Most of us think in terms of time. Man lives by time. Inventing the future has been a favorite game of escape. Let us think of the problem as though we are facing it for the first time. Let us view it as though we had never read a book. Surely that is the only way to solve the problem. As long as there is a time interval between the observer and the observed, it creates friction, and therefore is a waste of energy. Time is not the way. Whether we are old or young, it is now that the whole process of life can be brought into a different dimension. Right communication exists only when there is affection, love. There is an immediate response. There is no translation. There is no interpretation. There is comprehension at the same time, on the same level. One who is committed to any particular path is immature. They will never find the eternal, the timeless, because the particular to which they are committed belongs to time. Through time, you can never find the timeless. When the past ceases to influence the present, when time ceases, there is creative being which can be experienced only in deep meditation. Right thinking brings about right profession and right action. You cannot know how to think rightly without self-knowledge. Are you willing to spend the time to know yourself so that you can think rightly and find the right profession? Can we think about the unknowable? Can we meditate upon the timeless when our thought is the result of the past, of time?